I'll begin with a common, normal Hebrew phrase which says it all, shalom.
Shalom.
Let's make sure everybody can hear you.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Can you hear her?
Good.
Okay.
But this talk is about India primarily, although I will speak about some aspect of my life in other areas.
Yeah.
So in India, if you met someone and addressed them, I will tell you, and you've probably seen this, you'll put your two hands together, nod your head and say namaste,
Namaste.
which is a greeting. There is a Hindi meaning to it also. It means from my spirit to your spirit. So could you turn to your neighbor and try this out? Put your hands together and say namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, appreciate that. Okay, so let me go back to my beginnings. I was born at the very tip of
Southern
southern tip of South Africa, called Cape Town,
Yeah.
also known as the Cape of Good Hope.
Yeah.
And we were far from anyone anywhere. Growing up, there was not even an international airport in our city. We did not have television for many, many years. But we had two oceans, the Atlantic and the Indian, and they met in the Cape. And if you're fortunate to go there one day, you can actually see the oceans merge at a spot called Cape Point. Later on, if you'd like to ask me some questions about South Africa, I'll be happy to do the best I can. So moving forward, when Robert was in the what's called the U.S. Forest Service, and he was asked to go to represent the government in India as part of their foreign aid program called AID. As it happens, I was thrilled to go with one caveat. I had kept kosher my whole life. My parents were Shabbat observers. We had never ever eaten in a restaurant except for ice cream and tea. So going to India raised a question for me. What would I eat? What kind of food was available? And I knew that India was a developing country. It was part of the world at that time that was called the developing world or the third world.
What date? What dates are we talking about?
I'm sorry?
When were you
What
there?
date?
Oh, we're talking about 1969 through 71. During the Vietnam War, by the way, and I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
So we wrote to members of the community in India to ask them if they happened to know if kosher meat or chicken was available in New Delhi. And the answer was unfortunately no. The community, the actual Jewish community in New Delhi was small, and because they had no options, were all vegetarian, with a caveat that I'll come to shortly. So Robert went to speak to people in the State Department, and they said that if we could find a company that could send kosher meat, frozen kosher meat to India, they would facilitate it, because they wanted their representatives to be as happy, quote unquote, as possible. So we knew someone, I know his name today, his name is Abe Lowenthal. He worked for the Ford Foundation, and they sent him to Lima, Peru, and he kept kosher. So, contacts always work. He had found a company in Philadelphia called Cross Brothers, that was the name, and they sent him frozen meat to Lima. So we contacted them, and they told us they would do it for us as well, but I had to purchase 6 months worth of meat in advance. I was a young woman, recently married. I had no idea how much I should order. And I also didn't know who I would entertain, so I ordered obviously much, much more than I needed to. In the meantime, we arrive in India. We have the names of a few Jewish Indians in different parts of the country. Someone in Calcutta, someone in Bombay, it was called Bombay then, it's now called Mumbai, and in Delhi. The Indian Jewish community is very old. The myth or the truth is that they claim the first Indian Jews arrived on the coast of Malabar after the second temple was destroyed. When they got there, they discovered, as any of you who've been to India will know, the caste system was very much in place. So they took on the job of being oil pressers, and they were known as Sabbath oil pressers because they wouldn't work on the Sabbath. And so the Indian communities around them treated them like another caste. They were not ever trying to convert them to the Hindu religion, and that worked perfectly for everyone. Subsequently, Jews arrived from other places. For example, after the Spanish Inquisition, Jews came to an area called Kerala, South India, on the Arabian Sea, and they were the Jews of Cochin. They also were called the white Jews of India, and the reason they had that name was because they were very light-skinned, and most Indian Jews look like Indians. They also did not just them, but they did not marry, none of them intermarried with any other group, as though we were separate castes. There were like 4 or 5 distinct groups. There were the B'nai Israel, there were the white Jews of India, there were the black Jews of India, and there were black Jews in India. They believe originally they were the servants of other Jews, and they eventually converted. And then there was the very important group called the Baghdadi Jews, and they came from Iraq. And they had, and I'm going to speak about them later. So the Indian Jews actually acquired, like all people do, some of the customs of the local population. Besides the vegetarian aspect, they also, some of the women wore saris, and some of the men wore, and I'll describe it later, it's called a kurta and pajamas. Someone here wants to tell you what that is, I'll let you stand up. A kurta is a loose, white, comfortable shirt, and you wear it over a pair of pajama-like pants. You tie it up with string, and there's a reason I'm describing it. Shortly after we came to Delhi, probably about 2 months, my meat had not arrived yet, I received a phone call from the head of the little community in New Delhi. And he said to me, we are having a special event. An Indian Jewish retired railroad worker from the city of Pune will be coming here to Shohet. Shohet means it's a kosher slaughterer.
Yeah.
Chicken.
Yeah.
He was only trained to do this with chicken, not meat of any kind. And he does this for us on Passover and on Rosh Hashanah. So we can have something special for these 2 holidays. Would I like to have some chicken? And I said I would be delighted. Here's the issue, he said, you have to choose the chickens to be slaughtered. And that was a problem for me. So I asked him if he would be so kind as to choose the chickens himself, and I'd be very happy with whatever decisions he made. So the day arrives, and I go, and I'm describing this, it's a verbal picture, but you'll understand why I'm going to try and embellish it a little. I come in a taxi, not on a bicycle, not on a rickshaw, not by foot as most Indians went, but I come in a taxi, and I'm not Indian. And I come to the synagogue. sitting on the ground in the courtyard. It was really an enlarged house, you know, it wasn't elaborate or anything. It was a middle-aged Indian man in a kurta and pajamas, in a hatha yoga position. Strewn around him were dead chickens. That's the picture I want you to imagine. And you know, we go to a supermarket, we don't even know it's chicken if you're not vegetarian. It's just a piece of something that's wrapped in plastic.
Yeah.
You don't associate it with the animal.
Yeah.
This was very vivid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I came in and I didn't know, I should tell you, I had learned a little Hindi before, but I could see he could speak no English. So I said shalom to him so he would understand that we had a connection. And he answered shalom as well. And I gave him the namaste sign. And I asked Mr. Colette what I should pay him for his services. And Mr. Colette said to me, nothing. You cannot pay him anything. He feels that he's doing a mitzvah for the community here. And if you pay him, you are going to take away his mitzvah. And so I asked, but he said you can make a donation to the synagogue in his honor. And then he added, he doesn't pay for traveling because he's a retired railroad worker. He sleeps in the synagogue, so we don't have any, accommodation, and we feed him. And when he's finished slaughtering the chickens, he goes back on the train back to Pune. I can't tell you how important this sort of incident was, and that's why I wrote something on the board in Hebrew, and there is alliteration in English as well. The Hebrew phrase is, Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Razeh, and it's in the Talmud, and it means that we are all human, yes, we are all responsible for one another, but it means specifically the Jews are obligated to help other Jews in times of need. And he, an illiterate man, not at all educated, but he understood the understanding of the meaning of doing something for his fellow co-religionists, that he was willing to travel from Pune to Delhi twice a year. And I thought this was a real insight. And I should tell you that, to backtrack for a moment, before we actually came to India, the State Department had classes for their future diplomats and their wives. Actually, I don't think they were all women. There were no men in my class. And we went to the Foreign Service Institute in Virginia, where these classes were held. And I'm going to ask you in a moment to tell me something. So one of the issues they dealt with was security. They said, as young diplomats, they asked us where would we be or what place we might go to where we might inadvertently say something that the US Embassy was going to be doing, that our husbands were going to be doing, something we heard, because that's the whole world was in New Delhi, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So where do you think we would be vulnerable to revealing any information? Anybody have an idea? Yes? Yes?
A diplomatic reception.
Oh, that's a good place to go. You were very careful in diplomatic reception. That was a public place, but not where?
Supermarket?
Market getting closer. I'll give you a clue, maybe you'll remember. Barack Obama actually sent people to these places when he was running for president to hear what they actually thought about his chances and what they cared about. Okay, the barber shop and the hair salon.
Yeah.
So that was,
Yeah.
So I'm telling you that now, be careful when you go there.
Yeah.
Tibet in India at the time had Indira Gandhi as Prime Minister. It was the time of the Cold War, it was the war in Vietnam, and she was interested in developing a relationship with other non-aligned countries. And one of the countries was China. So I learned a phrase there. It's written. Robert wrote it for me on the board here. It's very, very simple. You probably could learn it easily and remember it. It is Hindi, Sindhi, Baha'i, Baha'i. If you could say that with me, Hindi, Sindhi, Baha'i, Baha'i. Anybody know what that might mean? India and China are brothers. Baha'i, Baha'i are brothers.
Brothers.
So, bye. I just want to tell you that it was very difficult to go anywhere in India on your own then. Very few people who were not in the cities spoke English. So I had taken this class, as I mentioned, in Hindi. In the summer, a normal day was 120 degrees, that's before global warming.
Wow.
And to keep cool, people sometimes would sleep on the flat roofs of their homes.
Yeah.
Because those of us who were lucky to have air conditioning, and we did, but the air conditioning also went out periodically.
Yeah.
So the roof was a place you could go to get some air.
Yeah.
We decided to go to a hill station in the Himalayas called Mussoorie. Not Missouri, where my husband's from, but Mussoorie. And three of us went. He drove, I was a passenger, and we took with us a really close friend of mine till today, whose husband was the New York Times correspondent for that part of the world, India, Cambodia, Laos, and he actually, if you ever saw the film The Killing Fields, it's his story of what happened to him in Cambodia. Yeah, they were our close friends then. So we drove, first of all, there were no gas stations. We couldn't get in a car and just assume we'd find gasoline. No restrooms, that's another issue. So the embassy had its own gas. So we filled up and the three of us drove to the mountains and it was absolutely beautiful. The clouds were below us, quiet, peaceful. It was an amazing experience. Then we tried to go back to our home. We got lost. No ways, no maps, no cars, no people. And what do you do? So we drove, and in the distance, at some point, we saw a little farming village. So because Robert and Janice naively thought I could speak Hindi, the decision was I would go and speak to the villagers, which I did. So this is the phrase I used. I said the phrase in many ways. I said, Kahe New Delhi. And I would use my hand into north, south, west, east, any direction. No response. So I said, Kahe New Delhi. They think my emphasis was wrong. Every trick of the trade I used didn't work. I came back and said, no information, I know nothing. Then we saw a car in the distance. It felt like the Messiah was coming. So we ran out into the road, we waved the car down, we assumed that someone who drove the car would speak English. And sure enough, the man did. So we asked him, how we could get back. And he said, follow me. I'm not going there, but follow me and I'll take you. I'm going to a state called Haryana. Once you're there, it'll be easy to direct you to Delhi. Okay, so I said to him, before he started, we followed him, what did I do wrong? I tried to get information and he didn't understand me. Oh, he said, you said New Delhi. That was your mistake.
That was your mistake.
And there's an old Delhi and there's a new Delhi. And this farmer had no idea probably that there was a New Delhi. He just didn't recognize it, and my accent must have also thrown him. That was my experience trying to speak Hindi. Never went on my own again. That was the end of that. So let me move on. Because we were the only family who kept kosher at the embassy would send us visitors who would come there, some of them very high level visitors, because they knew they could have a Friday night meal and they would direct them to our home. We had a famous Sephardi rabbi. I only found out afterwards he was famous. I didn't know anything about him at the time. So we also had students who were in the Peace Corps, young people who were in India. We were young and they were studying or being in the Peace Corps. They would come to have meals with us periodically. One of them was a young man, I won't give you his last name, but his first name was Tom. He was getting his PhD, he spoke Hindi fluently. He would come have meals with us occasionally. So he discovered I had never been to the Taj Mahal. And he thought that it was necessary for me to go. I won't talk about the birth of my daughter now, but I had a baby in India. So the time came, I left the baby with Robert and our Aya. Aya is a Hindi name for a nursemaid. He bought the tickets, we met, we went together to the railroad station. There was second class, I remember that particularly. Second class was a good class, not a bad class.
Yeah.
And we traveled with the same community going to Agra as we did coming back. So the train leaves and Tom, who's very tall, stands up in the middle of the aisle of the carriage and he puts on tefillin. And there's silence in the carriage. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, why? What is this for? Eventually, that's all he did. He put on tefillin, said a few prayers, and sat down. I had no idea he was religious at all. So I asked him, how long he'd been doing this, and I also asked him what impelled him to do this. I'm not even sure if he had a kippah on his head. He said, when he came to India, he saw this country populated, at that time was the second most populous country in the world. China was the first, India was the second then. And now India is going to have a greater population than China. So he said to me, when I came here, there were Hindus celebrating, enjoying publicly their religion, their temples. There were Muslims, because India had the second largest Muslim population. The Muslims were going to their mosque, celebrating their religion. And among the Hindus, there are Jains and Parsis and all kinds of other religious observants. And he said, I also have a religion. I also have an identity. And I'm going to show them that I have that. And that's why he did that. And that was just a little moment in time that really was impressive in that scene. And we came back with the same group. The people in our little second class seated area couldn't quite understand what a married woman was doing with a single man. And that was hard to explain that it was all right. And they came, I went to some, besides Agra and the Taj Mahal, which is amazing, I went to some other sites there. So I just want to tell you about Tom. The other aspect is my brother came to India. Unfortunately, he passed away a year ago, an older brother who was a doctor, and he was single. And when my family at home heard I was going to have a baby, they were fearful for my welfare. So my brother decided to come to India to be with me when I had the baby. He also, of course, there were no mohel. Mohels are ritual circumcising. There were no mohels. I don't know what they did. Maybe they brought someone from Bombay, but in New Delhi there were none. And sometimes people flew in a mohel from Singapore or from Australia. So he brought with him equipment in case he had to do a circumcision. But the problem was getting to India. He had to get a visa. He was also born in South Africa. He finished medical school there, worked in hospitals there. He was in London working in a hospital and applied at the Indian embassy consulate for a visa to come to India. They told him no, they would not give him a visa. And the reason was he was from South Africa. And they felt the South African government's apartheid views, as far as they were concerned, were reflected in him, and they would not grant it. So I went to the embassy, and they have, as those of you who've been in embassies or know, they have local hirers, people who know the system and who to go to if you have to have something done. So they managed to get the foreign ministry to change their edict, and they would allow me to come for 3 weeks. They estimated the birth of the baby. Well, the baby didn't know that. So time passed and she wasn't born.
Yeah.
So we had to persuade them to extend the visa. So I went, and I was rather pregnant, went to the foreign ministry. And the one thing about Indian families, they're very family oriented. As you may or may not know, you don't put your parents in an old aged home. And in fact, I don't even know if there were any. The mothers and fathers, as they grew old, lived with you. And they were respected and kept with you at home. So I explained that I was the first child to get married, the first child to be having a baby, and we have similar values. Our family cares strongly about one another, and he was the only one who could possibly come. Would they consider extending the visa? And they did. They gave him 3 months, which is as long as you could get, which was wonderful. So he actually traveled in India by train. I don't know if you remember the late Pierre Trudeau, we traveled around India as well on the train. That's how you see the country. The British introduced the railroad system, and it's really traversed the whole country. So we told a friend of ours in Bombay that an Indian friend, his name is Moshe Saltoon, may he rest in peace, that Leslie was going to be on a train going through the country. And when my brother arrived at the towns where he would disembark, he wore a kurta and pajamas like the local people wear. He was a tall, thin young man, and he carried with him always a little case with medical equipment and just to be, and he ended up using it when he was traveling. So when he arrived at the town that he would be getting off at, there was somebody waiting for him from the local Jewish community. And they would say to him, "Are you Dr. Green?" Because he stood out among the passengers. And when he acknowledged who he was, they would say, "Come with us." And that happened throughout his trip through India. He went as far south as the state of Kerala, and I know someone here spoke about Kerala recently, which was wonderful. In Kerala, that's where the white Jews of India lived, in a town called Cochin. They proudly had their name in the town, Jewtown, not Jews Town or Jewish Town, but Jewtown, and Jew Street. And they welcomed him with open arms. He stayed with them through a holiday called Sukkot, it's an 8-day holiday. And they carried the Torah around the streets through the 8 days, and nobody worked. It was an incredible holiday. The mothers tried to introduce him to their daughters. He was actually amenable because he hadn't been able to go out with anyone. When he came back to Delhi, I made a blind date for him with a Jewish Indian girl. The date was, they were going to go, the embassy was large, very large in India, so it had a little community center with a cafe and a swimming pool and American food, milkshakes and all kinds of things. So we thought it would be a nice attraction for this young lady. She turned up at our home with her father. So for a decent young woman to go out with a boy that she'd never met was not a good idea. So that's what happened to Leslie. They had a good date, but it didn't go anywhere. So there was one other thing I want to tell you. I want to talk to you a little bit, to jump ahead to the Baghdadi Jews who were primarily in the city of Bombay, which is Mumbai. They were very influential. I'm sure you've heard the name Sassoon, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there were two families that came from Baghdad and came to India. And the one particular family had 8 sons, and the Sassoons, and they sent their sons all over the world. Sort of like the French they're like that, just like that family. They also foresaw all the future events. Unfortunately, they were involved in the opium trade, and they actually sold opium to China. And the Chinese, unfortunately, became addicted, became a real problem. But they had inroads in Shanghai, and I'll get to that in a minute, and of course in Bombay. They supported all kinds of philanthropic causes. Today in England, one of them is in the House of Lords. The families continued, the name continues. I just want to tell you about the Sassoon and Kaduri families, because in the Second World War, this phrase, Kol Yisrael Arabim Zazeh Lazeh, was embedded in their souls. So when the Austrian and German Jews, basically they were Austrian, maybe some Czechoslovakian, I don't know, managed to escape to Shanghai, the family that had any influence were the Sassoons. And they built schools for the children. They made sure people had food to eat. They intervened when the Japanese became the power in place. The Nazis actually told them what they should do with the Jewish community in Shanghai. It's a terrible thing to tell you, but put them on ships, send them out to the sea, and that would be the end of the Jewish community. The Japanese did not do this, thank goodness, but the Sassoons had developed a relationship. They understood how to deal with the power in place, and they were able to get the Japanese to withstand whatever pressures the Germans were trying to place on them. That's just one example. There's a remarkable book, and I've written down the name, called The Last The Last Kings of Shanghai, by Jonathan Copeman. If you have not read it, then you should read it. It's amazing. The Kaduris are in Hong Kong, actually, at the moment. The Sassoons went to England and really established themselves there. The Kaduris are spread out to Hong Kong. Their descendants are still philanthropic and take care of communities wherever they are. I wanted to tell you a little bit about Maimit for a moment. Maimit eventually arrived in Delhi, and the embassy had a refrigerated room where they kept all their frozen products. We were told before we went all the problems we would face. One of them were health issues. When we were being trained at the Foreign Service Institute, they knew every spouse. They knew where we were going and who we were. And every time they came to the health problem, they would literally point at me and say, this is what can happen. In Delhi at the time, there was typhoid, typhus, cholera, and there was a leper colony nearby. So the actual American government paid us hazardous duty to go there because we would be exposed to the normal viruses that exist anyway. So with regard to food, you could never eat anything that was porous. Everything, every vegetable or fruit that our housekeeper bought had to be examined to make sure there were no pricks in it, that it could be put in, first of all, in, I don't know how to tell you this, in boiled water for 20 minutes, water that had already boiled, and then in a Clorox solution, and then peeled.
Yeah, and then
It's a miracle we are walking and talking
Yeah.
today. But those were some of the problems that anyone who lived there. The cows are revered, so the local population did not have meat per se, that goat meat, everything was, it was like moving to an island somewhere where there were restrictions. We were asked by the embassy not to drink milk from the local supply because they needed it for the children. So we were told we could use powdered milk. Now, if you keep kosher, you have powdered milk that's dairy, and you have powdered milk that's parrot. And that's a problem when you have someone who's cooking who can't read or write English or Hindi or any language. So how do you explain to someone kosher meat sections, kosher milk sections? What would you do if she couldn't read at all? Color, exactly. That's exactly what we had to do. The blue is dairy, the red was meat, and the powdered milk was a complicated subject. But those are some of the sort of little vignettes I want to share. And the last one, there was prohibition in Delhi. So for Pesach, where you drink wine, or supposed to drink wine, the local Indian community had an entree with the American embassy. This is what would happen. If you're a diplomat, you're allowed to import various and sundry items. So we could hypothetically import wine or alcohol. A Jewish member of the embassy always volunteered themselves to be that person. And Manischewitz would send wine and matzah to Delhi for the community. And when it arrived, in our case, we were the ones who were importing it. And when it arrived, we would phone Mr. Collette, who led the community, to come and pick up what Manischewitz had sent. And I hope it continued after we left. But this particular phrase, Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze LaZe, I read 3 days ago about Turkey, about the tiny ancient Jewish community in Antikya, Antiyka in Turkey, which had been demolished, the town, and some members of the community had died in the terrible events of those days. A Kazakh Jew who made a lot of money in Israel was sponsoring the remaining remnants of that community to bring them to Istanbul so they could go to a nursing home. And he quoted this phrase as what impelled him that he had the wherewithal to help them, and that's what he did. So on that note, I'm happy and willing to answer any questions that I can answer. And I know there are some ringers here, some people who lived in India, so feel free to add anything.
But I would ask anybody who has a question or comment to use a mic so that everybody can hear,
Yeah.
okay?
Okay.
I have a mic and Will has a mic, so just raise your hands.
Oh, thank you very much for the delightful talk.
Can't hear you.
It is on.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. I got you. All right, just a couple of comments. One is that I don't believe that Jews in India throughout their long history in that country have ever experienced any anti-Semitism.
Thank you for mentioning that, and I will tell you what I believe. I thought about that when I lived there and subsequently. The Hindu religion is not Christian or Christ-oriented, so they don't have that concept or that connection to the Jewish people. And the Jews there never, ever experienced anti-Semitism. In fact, it's very interesting. They considered themselves, the phrase that Fern used, which is quote-unquote advertised, this was Indian Jew or Jewish Indian. They felt very Indian. In 1947, India became independent. And in 1948, Israel was established as a state. When they left India, it was not like many other Jewish communities left because of persecution, etc. They said, and I spoke to them, India is our mother and Israel is our father. And we had never had a chance to go to join our people there. So most of them left. There were about 20 to 25,000 Indian Jews before the state of Israel was established, and there are now about 5,000 left, mostly in Mumbai, with a sprinkling in other places. Thanks, Aaron.
The other one I wanted to make is that you mentioned about traveling by train. I'm guessing that most of the rolling stock that on the Indian railways that you traveled in is still in use today. And it's very dilapidated.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
If you ever saw, I just tell you, when you looked in the streets, you'd see people hanging on doors and windows of buses and trains. I mean, hazardous isn't the word to use. By the way, I've come in a dress made in India on purpose. I don't usually wear such colorful clothes, but this is emblematic.
Yeah.
When I was in World War II, I was stationed in India.
Yeah.
And in Mumbai, I was actually invited to Passover Seder.
Ah.
To Moshe Saltu?
I don't
On the
remember.
road?
It's a long time ago, man. A long time ago.
Yeah.
And another thing, my wife and I traveled through India quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were in Mumbai, that's where Mumbai then, my wife was kosher. We were looking for a kosher place, and we actually were invited. We actually went to the Chabad house
Oh.
in Mumbai
Wow.
and had a wonderful meal. That was the year before the terrorists
Yeah,
killed
well,
them.
they weren't there when I
Yeah.
was there.
And-
Oh, may I say something apropos of that?
Sure.
Yeah.
When we lived in India, the North Vietnamese had representation, the PLO had representation, everyone did except Israel.
Except Israel.
Indira Gandhi was not sort of inclined to have Israel because she was cozying up to other countries. But today, they had a consulate in Mumbai. Today, Israel and India have very good relations. But thank you.
My Orthodox grandson is getting married to an Indian girl in June of this year.
Mm.
She is now living in Israel,
Mm.
but she is going to have a typical Indian wedding
Mm.
with a big engagement party first, and then all the festivities there, and then she will have the chuppah afterwards.
Mm.
So it'll be very interesting.
It will be wonderful. I'd love to be there. Yeah. I should mention that I've written down the names of some books here. I've read most of them, and I have one that if anybody wants to borrow, it's about India and the untouchables, and I haven't talked at length about that, but that was a real part of living there. It's called A Fine Balance, and it's won a Booker Prize, and it's on the table. But I want to mention a book called The Girl from Foreign. That's the strange title. It's a young woman who was born in Massachusetts to a Protestant father and an Indian mother, Muslim Indian mother, who discovers as a young 12, 13-year-old that her grandmother from India is actually Jewish, and discovers an unbelievable story. And as this girl grew up, as the grandmother aged, she asked her before she died to go to India to find out what happened to her family or see where she lived, because she had made a pact with the man she married. She married as a young girl a business partner of her father, who was much older than her, who went to Pakistan with her when India was partitioned. And she agreed to do that and live with him in Pakistan as long as he promised he would bury her in a Jewish cemetery. That was the deal she made. So it's a fascinating book. It's called The Girl from Foreign. This granddaughter, I think, had a Fulbright and went to India and did research on her grandmother's life, if you want to read that particular one. Go ahead.
I just have a comment. We were in Cochin in 1998, and we went to the wonderful synagogue there. It's just exquisite. And it was just like, I think it was called Jew Street, and
Yes.
there was a little shop, and it was closed, but there was a sign on the door that said, if you are Jewish and can be an Armenian, so we can have a service on Friday night, please call this number.
How
Unfortunately,
wonderful.
we weren't going to be there that long.
I think there are like a handful left today down there, unfortunately. The synagogue is a national monument, and people come from all over the world to see it. In Israel, I'm sure it's still there. They have an exhibition of synagogues from all over the world, and they have a replica of the synagogue in Cochin, which I think was first built in 1400s, and it is an incredible place. Yes.
I was recently in Cochin over Thanksgiving, and interestingly, Jewtown had a number of merchants who were Jewish, and of course that name somewhat represents what was going on in the street. The last Jewish shopkeeper, named Sarah Cohen,
I remember her.
died 2 years ago. The Muslim caretaker who looked after her is now running that shop and has a display of her work, and she was a seamstress and embroiderer and so on. And she was given quite a bit of honor and recognition while in her later years, and also particularly was recognized in the Indian press at the time of her death. So that was very interesting.
About 6 years ago, I met her in Cochin, and I remember I told her if I came, she loved chocolate. That was a connection with hers. I remember that. It was wonderful. They sold kipoks that she would bake, yes.
Ourselves, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating, thank you. And Marcel prepared an article called The Baghdadi Jews of India. We have some copies on the table where you signed in.